What do you do when the people who were supposed to protect you are the ones who destroy you? What do you do when your dreams feel like a cruel joke because the very moment you share them, everything falls apart? Today we're going into one of the most psychologically complex stories ever told, not a fairy tale. This is a story about betrayal so deep it came from inside the family. About suffering that made no logical sense for a man chosen by God. About the strange, terrifying silence of heaven when you're screaming from the bottom of a pit. This is Joseph's story. And I promise you, by the end of this, you will never read it the same way again. Most people know this story from a distance. They know the coat, the pit, the prison, the palace. They call it a rags to riches story. But here's what gets missed every single time. This is not primarily a story about success. This is a story about what happens to a person's soul when everything is stripped away. It's about identity under pressure. It's about whether God can be trusted in the dark, not just in the light. We are not just retelling this story today. We are doing an autopsy on it. We're going layer by layer. What happened, why it happened, and what it means for anyone watching this right now. Because Joseph's story isn't ancient history, it's a mirror. Joseph was the 11th of 12 sons born to Jacob, a man whose entire life had been a wrestling match with destiny. Jacob had his own complicated story, a stolen blessing, a deceived father, years of exile. And Jacob loved Joseph more than all of his other sons. The famous coat, the coat of many colors, as it's often translated, was more than a piece of clothing. They hated him. It was a public declaration of favoritism. It was Jacob saying, in front of everyone, "This one is different." And the brothers saw it, they felt it, and the Bible says something chilling. They hated him and could not speak a kind word to him.
Pause here, because we need to sit in that for a moment. Jacob, a man who had personally experienced the devastation of favoritism. His own mother had favored him over his brother Esau, and it nearly destroyed the entire family. This same man turned around and repeated the exact wound on his own children. This is what psychologists call a trauma repetition pattern. We unconsciously recreate the dynamics we were raised in, even when they hurt us. Jacob didn't just give Joseph a coat. He handed 10 other sons a wound they didn't ask for. Here's something rarely discussed. Joseph didn't cause the favoritism. He was born into a system he didn't design, but he also didn't seem to resist the status it gave him. When Joseph had his famous dreams, that his brothers' sheaves bowed to his, that the sun and moon and 11 stars bowed to him, he told them, "Why would you tell the brothers who already hate you that you dreamed they would bow to you?" Some read this as arrogance, some read it as naivety, but I want to offer a third interpretation. Joseph was 17 years old, raised as the favorite, and these were the first big moments where he felt like his life had meaning. He shared the dreams because he was excited. He didn't yet understand that some truths, told at the wrong time, to the wrong audience, have a cost. There's a wisdom he hadn't learned yet. And the pit was about to teach it to him. One day, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers who are out grazing flocks in Dothan. The brothers see him coming from a distance. "Here comes that dreamer," they say. And in that moment, something ugly and old activates in them. They decide to kill him.
Let's kill him.
Only the eldest, Reuben, objects. He quietly plans to rescue Joseph later, so they agree instead to. They strip him of his coat. They throw him in. And then, and this detail will stay with me forever, they sit down to eat. As Joseph is in the pit, 17 years old, terrified, calling out to them, his brothers are having lunch. Caravan passes. Judah has an idea.
Why kill him? Let's sell him.
So they pull Joseph out of the pit and sell him to Ishmaelite traders for 20 pieces of silver. He is taken to Egypt. They dip his coat in goat's blood and bring it to their father. Jacob tears his robes. He mourns his son for years, and Joseph vanishes.
Think about this. What Joseph experienced in that pit was not just physical danger. It was a total collapse of his known world. The people throwing him in, these weren't strangers. These were his brothers. The men he grew up with, the men who shared his father's name. And his father,
The man who loved him most didn't come, couldn't come, didn't even know. This is what psychologists call complex betrayal trauma.
the specific, devastating injury that comes not from a stranger, but from someone who was supposed to be safe. It rewires the brain's threat system.
The message it sends at its most primal level is, the people who should protect you will hurt you. You cannot trust love. Joseph had every reason to. He could have built walls around his heart for the rest of his life. And yet, he didn't. How? That's the question we have to chase through the rest of this story.
Notice what the brothers said when they saw him coming. Here comes that dreamer. Not here comes our brother, not even here comes Joseph. Their words revealed their hearts. That dreamer. They reduced him to the thing they resented most about him. This is what dehumanization looks like at its earliest stage. Stripping someone of their full identity and replacing it with the one quality you want to punish them for. They hated the dream before they hated the dreamer, because the dream implied a future they weren't invited into. This is older than Joseph. This is Cain and Abel. This is every workplace that penalizes ambition. This is every family that punishes the one who dares to believe they're called for something. The pit isn't just a hole in the ground. The pit is what people build for dreamers.
Joseph is purchased by Potiphar, captain of Pharaoh's guard, and something remarkable happens. Despite being a slave, teenager ripped from his family, from his homeland, from everything, Joseph excels. The Bible says the Lord was with him, and Potiphar notices. He promotes Joseph until Joseph is running his entire household. But then Potiphar's wife sets her eyes on Joseph. She pursues him, repeatedly, in his gull, citing disloyalty to Pod. One day she grabs his cloak. He runs. She keeps the cloak. She uses it as false evidence and accuses him of assault.
He assaulted me. This is his coat.
Throw him in prison.
This is where many misunderstand Joseph's story. There's a temptation to read Joseph's time in Potiphar's house as a reward. See, he was obedient, so things got better. But that completely falls apart when Potiphar's wife enters the scene. Joseph did everything right. He resisted temptation at enormous personal cost. He protected his integrity, and he went to prison for it. This is not a prosperity gospel story. This is something far more honest than that. The question the text is forcing us to confront is, what does faithfulness mean when faithfulness doesn't pay off immediately? What does it mean to be righteous when righteousness lands you in a prison cell? Notice the pattern of the coat. First coat, stripped by his brothers. Second coat, taken by Potiphar's wife. Joseph keeps losing his outer coverings, his status, his position, his freedom, his reputation. It's almost as if the story is asking, what is left of Joseph when everything is removed? Who is he without the coat his father gave him? Who is he without the status in Potiphar's house? Who is he when even his integrity is used against him? Every stripping is a test of the core. And the answer the story keeps giving, quietly, persistently, is this. Joseph is still Joseph. The dream is still in him. Something essential remains.
And here, right here, is where everything changes. Not in the palace, not in the moment of promotion. Here, in the prison, with two forgotten men. In prison, Joseph meets two of Pharaoh's former officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, both imprisoned after offending Pharaoh. Joseph notices they look troubled. Why do you look so sad today? They've each had dreams they can't interpret. Joseph says interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. He interprets both correctly. The cupbearer will be restored in 3 days. Both happen exactly as Joseph said. Joseph asks one thing from the cupbearer, remember me when things go well for you, mention me to Pharaoh, get me out of here. The cupbearer is restored, and promptly forgets Joseph for 2 full years.
Pause here. 2 years. Joseph interpreted the dream correctly, asked for one favor, and then waited in prison for 2 years with no response. I want you to feel the weight of that. He had done everything right. He had used his gift. He had asked appropriately. And the silence stretched on for 700 days. There is a specific kind of suffering that comes from almost, from nearly being seen, nearly being freed, and then watching that door close again. But there is hope in that pain. It's more painful than never having hope at all. Here's what I find extraordinary about this moment, and I've never heard anyone preach on this the way I want to right now. Joseph didn't wait until he felt spiritually strong to serve someone. He looked at two strangers and asked, "Why do you look sad?" He was a slave in prison, falsely accused, abandoned by his family, forgotten by the one man who could help him, and his reflex was to turn towards someone else's pain. That is not behavior born of bitterness. That is a soul that has somehow remained oriented outward. Joseph's greatest miracle wasn't the dreams he interpreted. It was that suffering didn't turn him inward. It didn't make him hard. It didn't make him someone who stopped caring. That is the transformation that had to happen before the palace was possible. Not just the elevation of position, the elevation of personhood.
2 years later, Pharaoh has two dreams that disturb him deeply. 7 fat cows eaten by 7 thin cows. 7 full heads of grain swallowed by 7 withered heads. None of his magicians can interpret them.
Then a servant remembers. Joseph is brought from prison. And the cupbearer finally remembers.
I remember my failures.
He tells Pharaoh about the young Hebrew prisoner who interpreted dreams. In prison with perfect accuracy, Joseph is brought before Pharaoh. He's cleaned up, his clothes changed, yet another coat, symbolically. And he stands before the most powerful man in the world.
Pharaoh shares his dreams. Joseph doesn't hesitate. 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 of famine. And then, without being asked, Joseph presents an entire economic policy to manage the crisis. Find a wise and discerning man and put him in charge of Egypt.
Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?
Wise as you shall be in charge of my palace. 30 years old, from the pit to the palace.
Think about this. The cupbearer remembered Joseph because of a personal crisis. Pharaoh's dream disturbed the whole court for 2 years. But God uses forgotten moments to bring about divine remembrance. Joseph's name was buried under the comfort of a restored official. But the moment there was a need no one else could meet, suddenly Joseph was relevant again. This is the painful mechanics of how God sometimes works in human systems. He doesn't bypass them. He works through them, even through the forgetfulness, even through the delay, even through the cupbearer's self-interest. The same system that ignored Joseph became the system that elevated him. Joseph doesn't interpret Pharaoh's dreams and then say, "Now here's what you need to do for me." He interprets the dreams and then immediately pivots to, "Here's what Egypt needs." He was presented with a room full of power, and his first instinct was to solve a national problem, not to leverage his moment. 13 years of suffering had not produced a bitter opportunist. It had produced a man whose first thought, even in the room of his own breakthrough, was about someone else's need. That character, that particular configuration of ego and service, is exactly what the position required. You can't put a man hungry for revenge in charge of grain distribution during a famine. You can't give power to someone whose deepest need is to be seen. Joseph had to become this person before he could occupy that seat. The pit wasn't punishment. The pit was preparation.
The famine spreads across the known world. People come from everywhere to buy grain from Egypt. And one day, Joseph looks up. His 10 brothers stand before him, bowing. He recognizes them immediately. They don't recognize him.
You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land.
Joseph throws them in prison for 3 days. Bring your youngest brother Benjamin to me as proof you are not spies, or you will all die.
Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life.
This is one of the most misread moments in the entire story. Many people read Joseph's behavior here, the false accusations, the imprisonment, the tests, as revenge. I want to argue it's something far more complex. Joseph is not yet weeping from joy. He's not weeping from triumph. He weeps because he still loves them. And that love is entangled with something he doesn't yet know how to process. He's not sure they've changed. He's not sure he is ready. The tests he puts them through are not cruelty. They are a traumatized man trying to determine, carefully and painfully, whether the people who destroyed him are safe. This is what healing actually looks like when you've been severely betrayed. It's not instant forgiveness. It's careful, grief-filled discernment. The brothers bow before him. Joseph's dreams are literally coming true, and Joseph doesn't gloat. He doesn't say, "I told you so." He weeps, because he had never wanted the dream to cost what it cost. He didn't want to be right at the price of a childhood spent in slavery. He didn't want to see his brothers brought low. This is a maturity in Joseph at the moment that is almost unbearable to witness. He has been given everything the world promises, and he feels the weight, not the glory, of how he got there. After multiple tests, after Benjamin is nearly enslaved, after Judah, the same Judah who suggested they sell Joseph, offers himself in Benjamin's place, Joseph can hold it no longer. He clears the room of all Egyptians. And then, the great prime minister of Egypt begins to weep so loudly that the Egyptians outside the room hear him. "I am Joseph." His brothers are terrified, speechless.
Come close to me.
And then this, "Do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling
Me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you.
Because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Stop. Just stop for a moment. Do not be angry with yourselves. His first concern, in the moment of his own vindication, is for his brother's emotional state. He is literally telling the people who threw him in a pit, who sold him into slavery, who faked his death, who caused their father 20 years of grief. Do not be angry with yourselves. This is not denial. This is not pretending it didn't happen. This is something rarer. This is a man who has spent years
Years of watching the long arc of his story have shown purpose threading through even the worst of it.
Joseph doesn't say, "God used it anyway." He says, "God sent me ahead of you." He reframes the entire narrative. Not, "You meant evil and God cleaned up the mess." But God was already working through what you did towards something none of us could see. This is a profoundly difficult theological position. It is not easy. It does not excuse what they did. Joseph still tested them. He still needed to know. They had changed. But at the center of it all, he found a thread of meaning that ran through every pit, every false accusation, every forgotten promise, and that thread held him together. Here is what I want to leave you with. Joseph's story is not a promise that things will work out quickly. It's not a formula, suffer plus stay faithful palace, because that reading misses the whole point. The point is not the palace. The point is who Joseph became on the way to the palace. The boy thrown in the pit was talented, gifted, chosen. But he was also young, perhaps naive, unaware of the cost his destiny would ask of him. The man who stood before Pharaoh was something different. Not broken, refined. He had learned to serve when he had nothing to gain. He had learned to interpret someone else's dream while his own still seemed dead. He had learned to weep without bitterness. He had learned, and this is perhaps the hardest lesson, that he could not control his story, only navigate it. You may be in a pit right now. You may be in a prison. You may have been sold out by someone who was supposed to be safe. And you may be asking the question that I believe Joseph asked in that dark cistern, where is God in this? The answer Joseph's story gives is not comfortable. It's not, he stopped them from throwing you in. It's, he was in the pit with you. And he had already started moving pieces you couldn't see, in the house of a man you hadn't met yet, in the dreams of officials not yet imprisoned, in the sleepless night of a Pharaoh years away. The dream in you is not dead because you're in a dark place. Sometimes the dream can only grow in the dark. I want to ask you one question before you go. If Joseph could look back over every pit, every betrayal, every prison, every forgotten promise, and still say, God sent me, what would your story look like if you believed the same thing about yours? Sit with that. And if this went deep for you, share it with someone who might need it today.